Welcome to Middle Class Matters. Today, 23rd June 2023, Business News in English from Dr. CMA Allegation. Report of the Expert Committee constituted by the Honorable Supreme Court of India, white dated March 2, 2023. Report dated May 6, 2023. Part 15. Chapter 5. Regulatory Framework and Compliance. Strengthening Measures. Introduction. Para 1. In the preceding chapters, we have dealt with the nature and scope of the alleged violations and discussed whether it can be said that there has been a regulatory failure in dealing with the alleged violations. Para 2. In this chapter, we deal with the subject of what measures we could suggest in order to strengthen the statutory and regulatory framework and to secure compliance with the existing statutory and regulatory framework for investor protection. Existing framework. Para 3. Before suggesting measures to improve the statutory and regulatory framework, it is important to have an overview of key elements of the existing framework. The regulatory framework for the securities market is overseen by SEBI as the specialized regulator with wide powers conferred on SEBI by Parliament under SEBI Act 1992 to discharge its twin mandate of orderly development of the securities market as well as protection of interest of investors in the security market. Para 4. SEBI has been vested by law with the entire gamut of powers of the state, legislative, executive and judicial, all rolled into one organization. The scale and scope of this power can be seen from just a plain reading of Section 11(1) of the SEBI Act, which provides as follows. Subject to the provisions of this Act, it shall be the duty of the board to protect the interest of investors in securities and to promote the development of and to regulate the securities market by such measures as it thinks fit. Para 5. An illustrative list of the measures is set out in section 11(2), and that is without prejudice to the generality of section 11(1). Indeed, SEBI has the power to make subordinate legislation, investigate violations of such legislation with statutory powers as its command, and quasi-judiciary adjudicate the alleged violations all on its own. Using the power to legislate, extensive subordinate legislation in the form of regulations have been made. Such regulations deal with market abuse and do not just cover market intermediaries over whom SEBI has licensing powers, but also market participants who do not need a certificate of registration from SEBI, such as companies that issue securities, traders who trade in the securities, and employees and directors of organizations that are connected to the securities market. The jurisdiction of SEBI extends not only to market intermediaries but also persons associated with securities market. Para 6. Adjudication of criminal prosecution alone is kept out of SEBI's hands, where SEBI has to satisfy an independent judge in the criminal justice system about its allegations of a violation having occurred. All the other powers of regulatory intervention, comport of the civil standard, and the judicial authority for determination of findings of facts and law are vested in officers of SEBI. Para 7. There is another facet of the matter. Criminal prosecution entails demonstrating the charges alleged beyond reasonable doubt, the criminal standard of proof, while the civil prosecution for issuance of directions and imposition of penalties entails adapting the standard of preponderance of probability, the civil standard of proof. Preponderance of probability entails drawing a reasonable conclusion as to which of the competing versions of what likely happened would seem more plausible and reasonable to be a reasonable mind, not a fanciful mind. The sharp distinction between possibilities and probabilities. Para 8. That apart, Since the doctrine of separation of powers is not strictly followed in regulatory design for any financial sector regulators as a matter of legal requirement, such regulators are not mandated by law to segregate and separate these powers of the state, an element that is judicially recognized as a basic feature of the Constitution of India. Indeed, of their own accord or by necessary practice, organizations like SEBI have to separate these powers, at least in form, by creating separate departments in making the legislation and its working conform to constitutionality. Para 9. However, the legal framework is lacking in mandating such separation as matter of law, governing the structural design of regulators. Human resources of the regulator are fungible within the regulatory organization, with officers serving the executive side and the quasi-judicial side being capable of transfers without legal stipulations such as prohibition of communication and correspondence between the quasi-judicial department and the enforcement department, or any mandatory cooling off period before an enforcement official can take up a quasi-judicial role in the organization. Para 10. Section 11C confers robust powers on SEBI to investigate any matter where it has formed a reasonable ground to believe that an investigation is warranted. Powers of a civil court empowering issuance of summons, calling for information, or for attendance of persons and examining them on oath are conferred upon SEBI. The power to investigate is also embellished with a statutory duty cast on any person from whom SEBI seeks information to provide the same. Para 11. These provisions constitute the basis on which SEBI has wide access to call data records and metadata about communication among persons being investigated, data that would enable determining even the physical location of persons who are communicating, the number of times they have communicated, even the physical location, even access to CCTV camera footage held by banks and market participants. SEBI has put such powers to effective use and examined market abuse with a degree of sophistication in its investigative powers. Para 12. Besides, failure to respond to SEBI can be visited with both monetary penalties as well as criminal prosecution. Powers to such premises to impound amounts equivalent to suspected value of illegal transactions and to disgorge amounts equal to wrongful gains made or loss averted have been conferred. SEBI is also empowered to issue ex parte ad interim restraints on individuals suspected of wrongdoing from trading in securities or accessing the market, or indeed from any specific type of activity as the situation demands. The economic variation of preventive detention or bar on assembly of persons who are likely to disturb public order and peace. Para 13. The check and balance against SEBI's actions in its civil proceedings is a post facto, post-decisional appellate review in the form of a first appeal before the Securities Appellate Tribunal SAT. Any order passed by the SEBI is subject to such appellate review. Appeals from the directions of the SAT lie in the Supreme Court of India, that too only on questions of law. Para 14. In short, the current statutory framework in which SEBI functions is a robust one, empowering SEBI with strong statutory powers at its disposal. It cannot be said that SEBI lacks powers to act and intervene in the case of wrongdoing in the securities market. Para 15. Therefore, the key question that the committee had to examine is how to make the regulatory framework more effective. Towards this end, the committee benefited immensely from much of the seminal work that has been done by the Financial Sector Legislative Reform Commission, chaired by Justice Retired B.N. Srikrishna, which after extensive public deliberations, drafted the Indian Financial Code with a robust framework on regulatory design and the law governing lawmaking. Para 16. Some of the reform recommendations of the FSLRC, in particular, those aimed at reforming regulatory organizational structure, investor grievance redressal, and systematic risk, lend themselves to retaliation in the context of the work done by this committee within its remit. Structural reforms. Para 17. SEBI performs multiple complex functions in its regulatory role. It ranges from a licensing role by registering market intermediaries and stipulating quantitative norms such as minimum capital requirements and qualitative norms such as composition of those in governance of market intermediaries to a policy making and legislative role, to an investigative role, to an adjudicatory role, quasi-judicial determination of questions of fact and law. Para 18. Yet investor protection is an abiding one that permeates SEBI's functions across these roles. Every measure of SEBI can be referable to the mantra of the investor protection, including prudential regulation such as stipulating net worth requirements, resolution of failing market intermediaries, taking measures to deal with defaults and failures of market participants, corporate governance for listed companies, listing regulations, and development and orderly growth of the securities market advocacy role. Para 19. For these functions to be appropriately performed, the regulator must be well structured and its own governance must be well thought through. Effective measures to ensure better regulatory governance would lead to greater transparency in lawmaking, greater social involvement in contributing to the law, and consequently greater acceptance and compliance with the regulations. Provisions that bring out better regulatory governance would essentially involve stipulation of legal obligations for government and for regulators, and that would lead to a more empowered, autonomous, and effectively functioning regulator. Suggested measures. Para 20. Based on deliberations of the committee and review of rich material that is available in the field of capital markets regulatory policy, and keeping in mind the remit of the committee with a view to strengthen the existing statutory and regulatory framework and to secure better compliance with the existing framework, the committee suggests implementation of the measures set out in the following paragraphs. We will see the remaining the next part of the video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.